The courtroom fell into a suffocating silence as the prosecutor played the audio recording. My father's voice filled every corner of that vast chamber, each word dripping with venom I had never heard directed at anyone before. "You'll do exactly as I say, Harrison, or I'll make sure you don't live to see another sunrise. Change that will, or your precious Anya will be the one to suffer." I watched my father's face drain of color as his own words condemned him. My mother, Serafina, always so composed, so perfect in her designer clothes and practiced smile, clutched the edge of the defendant's table until her knuckles turned white. My brother Marcus wouldn't even look at me. The flash of cameras, the gasps from the gallery, the frantic scribbling of journalists. It all felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. Judge Elias Vance raised his gavel, and I knew this was it. This was the moment 3 years of hell had been leading to. But before I tell you how it ended, before I share the sweet taste of justice that I fought tooth and nail for, I need you to understand how I got here. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever felt betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you most, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything. And I promise, this journey is worth every minute. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours? Let me take you back to where it all began. 3 years ago, I was a different person. I was Anya Thorne, dutiful daughter, the overlooked one, the one who bent over backwards to earn even a scrap of approval from my family, while my brother Marcus was groomed to take over Thorne Holdings, or family's billion-dollar real estate empire. I was the afterthought, the daughter who was supposed to marry well and look pretty at charity galas. Growing up in the Thorne household was like living in a gilded cage. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The sprawling Hamptons estate, the penthouse in Manhattan, the vacation homes in Aspen, and the French Riviera. The charity balls, the society pages, the carefully curated image of American aristocracy. But inside those marble walls, there was a coldness that no amount of luxury could warm. My earliest memory is of my 5th birthday party. It was a lavish affair, with a pony, a 3-tier cake, and a guest list that included senators' children and heirs to various fortunes. I remember standing in my frilly pink dress, watching my mother network with the other society mothers, my father close business deals disguised as casual conversation, and my brother Marcus showing off to the other boys. No one actually talked to me. No one sang happy birthday with any real feeling. It was a performance, and I was just a prop. My grandfather Harrison Thorne was different. He was the founder of Thorne Holdings, a self-made man who built his fortune from nothing. While my father Julian saw business as warfare and my mother Serafina saw it as a game of appearances, Grandpa Harrison saw it as a responsibility. He used to tell me stories about growing up poor in a small town in Pennsylvania, about the people he'd met along the way who helped him when he had nothing, about the promises he'd made to himself, about the kind of man he wanted to be. "Anya," he'd say, his weathered hands holding mine as we sat in his study away from the rest of the family. "Real wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the good you do, the lives you touch, the justice you uphold. Never forget that. These fancy houses, these bank accounts, they're all just tools. What matters is what you build with them." I was the only one who listened to those stories. Marcus would roll his eyes and check his phone, complaining that Grandpa was getting senile and boring. My parents would smile politely and change the subject to quarterly earnings or upcoming acquisitions. But I hung on every word, sensing even as a child that Grandpa was trying to teach me something important, something that had been lost in my father's generation. The divide in my family became more apparent as I grew older. When I was 12, I overheard my parents arguing about me. My mother's voice was sharp with frustration. "She's too soft. Julian, to sentimental. She cries when she sees homeless people. She gave away her allowance to some charity last week. That's not how we raised her." My father's response was cold. "She's a liability, but she's still a thorn. We'll marry her off to someone useful when the time comes. A merger disguised as a marriage, that's all she's good for." I remember pressing my back against the wall outside their bedroom, tears streaming down my face, realizing for the first time that my parents saw me as a business asset, not a daughter. "Marcus, who'd been walking by, saw me crying and just smirked. What did you expect, Anya? That they'd actually care? Then he walked away, leaving me alone in that dark hallway. High school was an exercise in trying to be invisible while simultaneously trying to be good enough. I got straight A's, hoping my academic achievements would earn their respect. My mother critiqued my appearance at every opportunity. You need to lose 10 pounds before the spring gala. Anya, no daughter of mine will look dumpy in a designer dress. My father barely acknowledged my existence unless I was needed for a photo opportunity or a society function. Marcus, meanwhile, was the golden child, 3 years older than me. He was everything they wanted. Charismatic, ruthless, ambitious. He cheated his way through prep school. And when I made the mistake of mentioning it to my parents, thinking they'd want to know, my father actually laughed. That's resourcefulness. Anya, that's how you get ahead in this world. Maybe if you were more like your brother, you'd be worth something. Only Grandpa Harrison saw me. Really saw me. He'd invite me to his study, where he kept his first dollar framed on the wall. And we'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. He taught me about business, about ethics, about the responsibility that came with wealth and power. When I got my first period and was too embarrassed to tell my mother, it was Grandpa who noticed I was upset and gently asked his longtime assistant, Mrs. Chen, to help me. When I struggled with algebra, Grandpa hired a tutor without telling my parents because he knew my mother would say I was being stupid and my father wouldn't care. You're going to do great things, Anya, he told me on my 16th birthday. Just the two of us in his study, while the obligatory party raged downstairs. Not because of this family name, but in spite of it. You have something they don't have. You have a conscience. You have compassion. Don't ever let them take that from you. I spent my college years studying business and law at Columbia, thinking maybe, just maybe, if I proved myself capable, my family would see me as more than just a pawn in their social chess game. I threw myself into my studies with a desperation that my professors mistook for ambition. I interned at rival firms during summers, learning everything I could about corporate law and finance. I graduated summa cum laude, top of my class. My father didn't attend the ceremony. He said a board meeting about a potential merger in Singapore was more important. My mother came but spent the entire time on her phone, coordinating a fundraiser for some cause she didn't actually care about. When I walked across that stage, when they called my name with all those honors, my mother didn't even look up. Marcus didn't even bother to send a text. He was in Monaco with friends, posting pictures on social media of champagne and yachts while I was achieving what should have been a proud moment for our family. Only Grandpa Harrison was there, beaming with pride in the third row, taking pictures with a disposable camera because he never quite got the hang of smartphones. After the ceremony, he took me to dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, far from the Manhattan establishments where we might run into anyone from our social circle. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, he said, his eyes misty. Your grandmother would have been too. You remind me so much of her. She had that same fire, that same sense of right and wrong. It was one of the best nights of my life, and one of the last really happy memories I have before everything fell apart. After graduation, I deliberately took a position at Sterling & Associates, a competing firm. Not one of the companies under the Thorn Holdings umbrella. I wanted to prove I could succeed on my own merit. Without my family name opening doors, my starting salary was modest by Thorn standards. Laughable, really. I rented a small apartment in Queens, rode the subway to work, learned to cook because eating out every night wasn't in my budget. My mother was horrified. You're living like a common person, Anya. It's embarrassing, but I loved it. For the first time in my life, I was free. My colleagues didn't know who I was, didn't care about the Thorn name. I was just Anya, the junior analyst who worked harder than anyone else, who stayed late, who volunteered for the difficult projects. My boss, Robert Sterling, was a tough but fair man who'd built his own firm from nothing. He reminded me of Grandpa in some ways. I spent every spare moment I had with Grandpa Harrison. We'd meet for lunch at out-of-the-way diners, or I'd visit him at the estate when I knew my parents would be out. He was getting older, moving a bit slower, but his mind was as sharp as ever. We talk about business, about ethics, about life. He started saying things that, looking back, I should have paid more attention to. Julian is getting more aggressive with the business. He told me one afternoon about 6 months before everything changed. He's making decisions I don't agree with. Cutting corners. Making deals with people who aren't honorable. I've tried to talk to him, but he doesn't listen anymore. He thinks I'm old and out of touch. What kind of deals? I asked. Concerned. Grandpa shook his head. Nothing I can prove yet. Just instincts. But my instincts have kept me in business for 50 years. Anya, something isn't right. I've started documenting things. Keeping records. Just in case. In case of what? He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. In case the empire I built becomes something I no longer recognize. In case I need to protect what really matters. At the time, I thought he was being paranoid. I wish I'd taken him more seriously. 2 years ago, everything changed. Thorn Holdings was facing a major crisis. A series of bad investments, combined with some questionable financial decisions by my father, had put the company on the brink of bankruptcy. The board was in chaos. Investors were pulling out leaks. The media was circling like vultures, writing pieces about the fall of the Thorn dynasty, about decades of careful reputation, building crumbling overnight. I heard about it through the financial news, before anyone in my family bothered to tell me. I watched the stock price plummet, read the analyses about Thorn Holdings' exposure in bad markets, saw the speculation about potential bankruptcy. My first instinct was satisfaction. They'd always been so arrogant, so sure of their superiority. Maybe this would humble them. But then I thought about Grandpa. This was his life's work. Yes, my father had corrupted it. But at its core, it was still what Grandpa had built from nothing. And there were thousands of employees, regular people with families and mortgages and dreams, who would lose everything if the company went under. I spent a week in my tiny apartment, barely sleeping, analyzing the company's financials that were publicly available. I called in favors from colleagues, got insider perspectives on the industries Thorn Holdings was involved in. I worked out a rescue plan, a comprehensive strategy to restructure the debt, divest from failing sectors, and refocus on the company's core strengths. But implementation would require capital, a lot of it. And it would require someone the board trusted to oversee the restructuring. I had the plan, but not the resources or the authority. That's when I made the decision that would change my life. I had saved every penny from my job at Sterling and Associates. I'd lived frugally, invested wisely, and built up $520,000. It was my nest egg, my security, my ticket to eventually starting my own firm someday. It represented 2 years of 60-hour work weeks, of skipped vacations, of saying no to the lifestyle I'd grown up with. I liquidated it all, every single penny, and I invested it in Thorn Holdings when no one else would. Then I called my father. It was the first time I'd spoken to him in months. I have a plan to save the company, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. And I have $520,000 I'm willing to invest, but I need a seat at the table. There was a long silence. Then my father laughed. A cold, humorless sound. You think you can save Thorn Holdings, Anya? This isn't some academic exercise. This is real business. High stakes. You're out of your league. Then why are you on the verge of bankruptcy? I shot back, surprising myself with my boldness. Look at my proposal. If you don't think it will work, fine, but at least look at it. He did. And for the first time in my life, my father looked at me with something other than indifference or contempt. It still wasn't respect. Not really. But it was acknowledgement. I existed. I had value, even if only as a tool to save his empire. The board meeting where I presented my plan was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. A room full of powerful men and women, most twice my age, all looking at me with skepticism. My mother was there, her expression one of barely concealed embarrassment that her daughter was making a spectacle of herself. Marcus sat in the back, smirking, clearly expecting me to fail, but my father let me speak. And as I laid out my analysis, my restructuring plan, my projections, I saw expressions change. Questions were asked. Hard questions. And I had answers for all of them. By the end of my presentation, the room was silent. Robert Chen, one of the oldest board members and a friend of my grandfather's, was the first to speak. "This is brilliant work, Miss Thorne. Truly brilliant. I move that we accept this proposal and give Miss Thorne a provisional role in overseeing the restructuring." The motion passed. My father's face was unreadable. My mother looked like she'd swallowed something sour. Marcus had stopped smirking. The next 6 months were a blur. I worked 18-hour days, implementing the restructuring, negotiating with creditors, meeting with investors. I essentially put my life on hold. My apartment gathered dust. I slept on a couch in a borrowed office. I lived on coffee and takeout. But it worked. Slowly, painfully. Thorne Holdings stabilized. Grandpa watched it all with pride. "You're saving my life's work," he told me, tears in his eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you." But my father never said thank you. Neither did my mother. Neither did Marcus. As the company recovered, as the crisis passed, I kept expecting some acknowledgement, some recognition. Instead, once the immediate danger was over, I was quietly shuffled aside. My provisional role ended. I wasn't invited to board meetings anymore. It was as if my contribution had never happened. When I confronted my father about it, his response was chilling. "You did what any Thorne should do. You protected the family legacy. Did you expect a medal? You invested your money and it paid off. You got your return. That should be enough. I saved this company," I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. "I put everything on the line. And now you're just dismissing me. Anya, you're being emotional. This is business. You're not board material. You proved you can execute a plan. And that's admirable. But strategic leadership requires something you don't have. And what's that? The ability to make hard choices without letting sentiment get in the way. You're too soft. Just like your grandfather has gotten too soft in his old age." It was the closest my father had ever come to openly disrespecting Grandpa Harrison. And it made my blood run cold. But I bit my tongue, took my returned investment, and went back to my job at Sterling & Associates. That was when I noticed Grandpa starting to change. I began losing weight. He looked tired all the time. When I expressed concern, he waved it off as just getting older. But I didn't believe him. I insisted he see a doctor. And after much resistance, he finally agreed. The diagnosis was frightening. Chronic heart disease. Complications from years of high blood pressure and stress. The doctor said he needed to reduce stress, take his medications religiously, and possibly consider some procedures. My father's response was to suggest that maybe it was time for Grandpa to fully retire and let Julian take complete control of the company. Grandpa refused. "I'm sick. Not incompetent. I'll step back when I'm dead, and not a moment before." That conversation happened at a family dinner. One of those mandatory gatherings we had 4 times a year. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother smiled her practiced smile and tried to change the subject. Marcus looked annoyed that the old man was being stubborn. And my father. I saw something in my father's eyes that night that I'd never seen before. Something calculating and cold. Over the next few months, Grandpa's condition deteriorated rapidly. He was in and out of the hospital. The doctors were concerned, but couldn't quite pinpoint why he wasn't responding to treatment as expected. I visited him every day. Took time off work to be there. My parents visited occasionally. Always with witnesses. Always when there were other people around. It felt performative, like they were maintaining appearances. Marcus never visited at all. "Hospitals depress me," he said when I confronted him about it. "Besides, Grandpa always liked you better anyway. You keep him company." During one of my visits, when Grandpa was having a good day, he gripped my hand urgently. "Anya, I need to tell you something. I've been meaning to update my will. Things need to change. Julian, he's not the man I thought he was. The company, the legacy. It should go to someone who understands what it's really about. Someone with integrity." "Grandpa? Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. I'm old and I'm sick. Sweetheart, we both know how this ends. but I need to make sure things are set right. I have a meeting with my lawyer next week. There are things you need to know. Documents I need to show you. But that meeting never happened. 3 days later, Grandpa's condition took a dramatic turn for the worse. The doctors were baffled. His vitals had been improving. And then suddenly, he was in critical condition. The family made the decision to move him to the estate, to let him spend his final days at home. I objected, said he needed to be in the hospital, but I was overruled. My father made it clear I wasn't welcome to stay at the estate. It's too crowded. Anya, we need space for the medical staff. You can visit during the day. So I did. Every single day. Sitting by Grandpa's bedside, watching him fade away. But I noticed strange things. The medical staff seemed different every few days. Dr. Morrison, his regular physician, seemed frustrated when I caught her in the hallway one day. Something's not right, she whispered to me. His symptoms don't match his diagnosis. I've requested certain tests, but the family keeps refusing. They say they don't want to put him through more stress. But I think we need to know what's happening. Before I could pursue this further, before I could demand answers, Grandpa died. It was sudden. In the middle of the night, I got the call at 3 a.m. from my father's assistant. Not even from my father himself. Just his assistant, clinical and brief. Your grandfather has passed away. The family is gathering at the estate. I drove through the dark. Empty streets. Tears streaming down my face. My heart breaking. When I arrived at the estate, there was already a flurry of activity. Funeral arrangements were being made. People were making phone calls. And in the middle of it all, my parents looked composed. Sad, in that appropriate, dignified way that looked good for the cameras I knew would come soon. I went to Grandpa's room. He looked peaceful, lying there, but also somehow smaller than he'd been in life. I sat with him for hours, holding his cold hand, whispering how much I loved him, how much he'd meant to me. No one else came. No one else sat with him. They were too busy managing the narrative, controlling the image. The funeral was a week later. Exactly as I said before. A spectacle of power and prestige. Politicians, business tycoons, socialites, all coming to pay respects to Harrison Thorne, while probably calculating how his death would affect their own interests. I couldn't stop crying. Grief overwhelming me. While my parents worked the room, and Marcus networked shamelessly, the will reading was scheduled for exactly 1 week after the funeral. I wasn't expecting much. Never expected to inherit the company. That was always meant for Marcus. But I thought maybe Grandpa had left me something personal. Some token of our relationship. Maybe a letter. Maybe one of his books. Maybe that first dollar he'd framed and told me stories about when the lawyer, a nervous young man named David Sterling, who I'd never seen before and who was definitely not Grandpa's longtime attorney, read the will. The words felt like a physical blow. To my granddaughter Anya, I leave the sum of $520,000. In recognition of her contribution to the family business. I felt the air leave my lungs. $520,000. The exact amount I had invested to save Thorne Holdings. Not a penny more. Nothing personal. Nothing that showed I'd meant anything to him beyond being a useful financial instrument. The remainder of my estate, including all shares in Thorne Holdings and all properties, I leave to my son Julian Thorne, to be managed and distributed at his discretion. The room spun. I looked at this stranger reading Grandpa's supposed will, and nothing made sense. Where was Gerald Prescott? Grandpa's attorney of 30 years. Why was this David Sterling, who looked barely older than me, reading the most important document in my grandfather's life? Wait? I managed to say, my voice sounding far away. Who are you? Where's Gerald Prescott? David Sterling shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Prescott retired 6 months ago. I took over his practice. 6 months ago. But Grandpa spoke to me about updating his will just weeks before he died. You're saying you handled that? The lawyer's discomfort increased. I handled all recent updates to Mr. Harrison Thorne's estate document. Yes. These are his final wishes. Miss Thorne. Something was screaming inside me that this was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. But when I opened my mouth to object further, My father cut me off with a voice as cold as ice. Anya, don't embarrass yourself. Father made his wishes clear. Perhaps if you'd spent more time with him in his final days instead of focusing on your career, things might have been different. The lie was so blatant, so cruel, that I couldn't even formulate a response. I had been there every single day. I had been the only one who consistently visited, who sat with him, who held his hand, and my father was rewriting history right in front of me. My mother added, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Darling, you got back what you invested. That's more than fair. Your grandfather was very grateful for your help during the crisis, and he made sure you were compensated. Be grateful for that. Some people would call that a fair return. Marcus, emboldened by our parents, leaned back in his chair with that insufferable smirk. Come on, Anya. You really thought you were going to inherit something significant. You saved the company once. Sure, but that doesn't make you thorn material. You never have been. This is business, not a charity. The real assets go to people who can actually manage them. Each word was a knife, but I still couldn't quite process what was happening. I looked at the lawyer again. Can I see the will? The actual document. David Sterling glanced at my father before responding. My father gave an almost imperceptible nod. The lawyer handed me a copy, and I read through it with shaking hands. The language was formal and legal, but something felt off. The tone didn't sound like Grandpa. The phrasing was cold, transactional, and it was dated just 2 weeks before his death, when he'd been so sick he could barely hold a conversation. I want to contest this, I said, my voice stronger now, despite the tears streaming down my face. I don't believe this is legitimate. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. My father stood up, his full height and authority on display. Anya, if you contest your grandfather's will, you will get nothing. Not the 520,000. Nothing. And you will be cut off from this family entirely. No access to family properties, family accounts, family connections. You will be persona non grata in every circle that matters. Is that really what you want? To dishonor your grandfather's memory by dragging his name through a legal battle. The threat was clear. Back down, or lose everything. In that moment, standing in that cold, impersonal conference room, looking at the faces of my family, I realized something profound. I had nothing to lose because I'd never had anything to begin with. Their love, their respect, their approval, none of it had ever been real. I'd been chasing ghosts my entire life, but I wasn't ready to fight. Not yet. I didn't have weapons, didn't have evidence, didn't have allies. So I took the coward's way out. I nodded, took my copy of the will, and walked out of that room with as much dignity as I could muster. I didn't speak to any of them for weeks after that. I threw myself into work at Sterling and Associates with a desperate energy. Robert Sterling noticed. Anya, I'm worried about you. You're working yourself to exhaustion. Whatever you're running from, it'll still be there when you stop. He was right. But I didn't know what else to do. The inheritance, such as it was, had been deposited into my account. $520,000. My own money returned to me, now being presented as some generous bequest. I stared at that number in my bank account and felt nothing but emptiness. I moved to a slightly better apartment in Manhattan. Still nowhere near the luxury I'd grown up with, but comfortable. I tried to build a life that didn't involve my family at all. I made friends outside their social circle. I dated a little, though nothing serious. I tried therapy. Sitting in a small office in Chelsea, telling a patient woman named Dr. Reyes about my family while she nodded and made notes. It sounds like you've been seeking validation from people who are fundamentally incapable of giving it. Dr. Reyes said during one session. The question is, when will you stop seeking it? When will you validate yourself? It was a good question. I didn't have an answer. 6 months passed like that. 6 months of trying to move on. Trying to forget. Trying to convince myself that I was better off without my family. And then everything changed again. It was a Friday night in November. Unseasonably cold. The first snow of winter just starting to fall. I came home from work late. As usual. looking forward to nothing more than ordering takeout and watching something mindless on TV. There was a package outside my apartment door. It was a plain brown box, carefully sealed with packing tape. No return address. Just my name and address written in block letters with a black marker. Something about it made my hands shake as I picked it up and brought it inside. I sat on my couch, the box on my coffee table, staring at it for a long time before I finally opened it. Inside was an old leather journal, worn at the edges, the kind with a string tie. Underneath it was a USB drive, old and scuffed. And on top of everything was an envelope, sealed with wax in an old-fashioned way, addressed to me in handwriting that made my breath catch. It was my grandfather's handwriting, not the shaky, uncertain script from his final days, but the strong, confident hand from when he was healthy. This had been written before he got sick. My hands trembled so badly I could barely break the wax seal. I pulled out several pages of stationery, expensive paper with Harrison Thorne embossed at the top, and began to read. My dearest Enya, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and my worst fears have come to pass. I am writing this in the middle of the night, in my study at the estate, while everyone else sleeps. I don't have much time, and there's so much I need to tell you, so much you need to know. First, you need to understand that the will that will be read after my death is not my will, not my true will. I wrote a will years ago, when I was healthy and clear-headed, that left everything to you. The company, the properties, the fortune, all of it. You were always meant to inherit. Anya, you're the only one who understands what I built this for. You're the only one with the integrity, the compassion, the intelligence to carry on the legacy the right way. But Julian found out. I don't know how, but he found out. About 4 months ago, he came to my study and confronted me. He was furious. I'm more angry than I'd ever seen him. He said I was betraying him, betraying Marcus, throwing away the family name by leaving everything to an ungrateful girl who didn't appreciate it. I tried to reason with him, but Julian is beyond reason. He's not the son I raised. Somewhere along the way, I lost him to his own ambition and greed. I had to stop reading. My vision blurred with tears. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the pages. I took several deep breaths and continued. Julian threatened me. Anya, he threatened you. He said if I didn't change the will, he would make sure you had an accident. He described it in such detail, such casual cruelty, that I knew he meant it. He's capable of it. I don't know when my son became a monster, but he is one. I couldn't risk your safety, so I agreed to change the will. But I'm not going down without a fight. I've been documenting everything. Every conversation, every threat, every suspicious occurrence. I've hidden evidence in places they'll never think to look. The USB drive with this letter contains video and audio recordings. I installed a hidden camera system in my quarters. Something Julian doesn't know about. It's all there. Every threat, every manipulation. In my study at the manor, behind the portrait of your grandmother, there's a safe. The combination is your birthday. Month, day, year in 6 digits. Inside, you'll find the original will. The real one. Dated 5 years ago when I was still healthy and free to make my own choices. You'll also find more documentation. Financial records that show what Julian and Serafina have been doing with company money. They've been embezzling. Anya. For years, they've been stealing from the company I built, using it for their own personal enrichment, making deals with criminals and corrupt officials. I've documented it all. I'm dying. Sweetheart, I know that. My doctors won't tell me, but I can feel it. And it's not just the heart disease. Something's wrong. Something they're not telling me. My medications were changed recently, against Dr. Morrison's recommendations. Julian insisted on bringing in new doctors. Specialists, he claimed. But I don't trust them. I think they're poisoning me. I know that sounds paranoid. But I've been keeping samples of my medications, and they don't look right. I've hidden them too, along with everything else. If I'm right, if they're actually trying to kill me, then you need to know. You need to fight for justice. Not just for me, but for everyone they've hurt. Everyone. They'll hurt in the future if they're not stopped. Fight for what's yours. My dear girl, fight for what's right. Don't let them win. You're stronger than you know. You've always been the strongest person in this family. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to protect you. I'm sorry I'm leaving you to face this alone. But I have faith in you. More faith than I've ever had in anyone. The journal contains names, dates, amounts, evidence of every illegal dealing, every bribe, every fraud. Use it. Trust only people who have no connection to the Thorn name, to the company, to our social circle. Julian's influence reaches far and wide. Be careful. Be smart. And know that you were loved, truly loved, by at least one person in this rotten family. All my love, always and forever. Grandpa, I don't know how long I sat there, clutching those pages, sobbing so hard. I thought I might be sick. Everything I'd suspected, everything I'd felt but couldn't prove. It was all true. My father had threatened me, had threatened Grandpa, had possibly murdered him, and they'd stolen everything. Not just my inheritance, but my grandfather's legacy, his life's work, his final wishes. When I could finally move, when I could finally think, I plugged the USB drive into my laptop with shaking hands. There were dozens of video files, organized by date. I opened the oldest one. The video quality was grainy, clearly from a hidden camera, but the audio was clear. My grandfather was in his study, sitting at his desk, looking through papers. The date stamp showed this was from about 7 months ago. The door opened and my father walked in. What followed was a conversation that made my blood run cold. Julian arguing that Harrison needed to step down completely, that he was too old and out of touch to run the company. Harrison refusing, saying that he still had years left, that he wasn't ready to hand over control to someone who'd lost sight of the company's values. Julian's voice growing colder, more threatening. You're going to step down. Father, one way or another, and you're going to change that will. I know what you're planning. I know you want to leave everything to Anya. That's not going to happen. Julian, she's your daughter. How can you talk about her like she's an enemy? She's a liability. She's weak. She has no business running an empire like this. The will stays with me, or there will be consequences. Are you threatening me, your own father? I'm telling you how it's going to be. Change the will. Old man. Or Anya will have an accident. You know how dangerous the city is. So many things can happen to a young woman living alone. I watched the entire video. Then the next one. Then the next. Hours of footage of my father threatening Grandpa. Of my mother standing by complicitly, even laughing at times. There were videos of them meeting with the young lawyer David Sterling, coaching him on what to say, paying him enormous sums of money. There were recordings of them discussing how to handle me, how to keep me quiet, how to make sure I didn't cause problems. But I couldn't just take this to the police. My father had connections everywhere. The police commissioner had been at his wedding. Half the judges in New York owed their positions to campaign contributions from Thorn Holdings. I needed help. Real help. From someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. I thought about Uncle Caleb. I hadn't seen him in years. But I remembered how he'd stood up to my father once and paid the price. If anyone would understand, if anyone would believe me, it would be him. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Connecticut. The address I had for Caleb was old, and I wasn't sure he still lived there. But when I pulled up to a modest house with a well-tended garden, I saw an old man working in the yard. His hair was completely white now, his movements slower, but I recognized him immediately. Uncle Caleb. He looked up, squinting in the morning sun. Then his eyes widened. Anya, little Anya Thorn, my God. You've grown. I heard about Harrison. I wanted to come to the funeral, but I figured I wouldn't be welcome. You would have been more welcome than half the people who were there. My voice cracked. Uncle Caleb, I need your help. I need your help desperately. And I don't have anyone else to turn to. We sat in his living room, surrounded by law books and old case files, and I told him everything. I showed him Grandpa's letter. We watched the videos together. With each revelation, Caleb's expression grew darker and darker. I knew Julian was ruthless. He said when we finished, his voice heavy with disgust. When I sued him 20 years ago over that construction fraud case, he didn't just fight me in court. He destroyed my entire career. He called in favors, spread rumors. I made sure I could never work in a major firm again. But this threatening his own father, threatening his own daughter, potentially murdering Harrison, this is beyond anything I imagined. Will you help me? Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Anya, do you understand what you're asking? Going up against Julian Thorne means going up against one of the most powerful families in New York. He has connections everywhere. Judges, politicians, media moguls, law enforcement. He'll use every resource at his disposal to destroy you. He's already shown he's willing to kill to protect his interests. He already destroyed me, I said quietly. He destroyed Grandpa. What more can he take? Your life, Caleb said bluntly. If Julian threatened Harrison, if he was involved in his death, who knows what else he's capable of? This isn't just about money anymore. Anya, this could be dangerous. People who threaten the Thorne Empire have a way of disappearing or having unfortunate accidents. Then I'll be careful. But I can't let them win. Uncle Caleb, I can't let them get away with this. Grandpa trusted me to fight for the truth. If you won't help me, I'll do it alone. But I'm doing it. Caleb studied me for a long moment, and I saw something change in his expression. A spark of the man he used to be. The crusading lawyer who'd fought for justice before my father crushed him. I've spent 20 years in exile because I dared to stand up to your father. I'm an old man with nothing to lose and a lot of regrets about battles I didn't fight. If you're determined to do this, then yes, I'll help you. But we do this smart. We gather evidence. We build an airtight case, and we don't make a move until we're absolutely certain we can win. That night, I moved in with Uncle Caleb. My apartment wasn't safe anymore. Not if my father had threatened me before. We spent the first week just going through everything Grandpa had left. The journal was meticulous. Years of entries documenting every suspicious transaction, every questionable deal, every instance of corruption. Grandpa had been building a case against his own son for years, probably hoping he'd never have to use it. We found records of offshore accounts, bribes to city officials, fraudulent contracts. Thorne Holdings wasn't just a real estate empire. It was a criminal enterprise. And my father had been running it like a mob boss for the better part of a decade. But we quickly realized we needed more than just documents. We needed expert testimony. We needed witnesses. And most importantly, we needed someone with the authority and integrity to take on a case this big. Caleb made some calls to old contacts. One name kept coming up, Eleanor Reed, a federal prosecutor with a reputation for taking down powerful people. She'd successfully prosecuted 2 senators, a Fortune 500 CEO, and numerous organized crime figures. She was known for being incorruptible, fearless, and absolutely relentless. She was also known for being extremely selective about her cases. Eleanor won't touch this unless she's convinced it's solid, Caleb warned. She's been burned before by people making accusations against the wealthy that turned out to be vendetta-driven. We need to present this perfectly. Getting a meeting with Eleanor Reed took 3 weeks of persistent phone calls, letters, and leveraging Caleb's old professional connection with her. Finally, her office called. 15 minutes. That's all we got. Eleanor Reed's office was in a federal building in downtown Manhattan, all concrete and glass, completely different from the ornate buildings where my family did business. The woman herself was in her late 40s, with short gray hair, sharp eyes behind frameless glasses, and an expression that suggested she'd heard every lie and excuse imaginable. She gestured to the chairs across from her desk without standing. You have 15 minutes. Caleb vouches for you, which is the only reason you're here. Make it count. I had rehearsed this pitch 100 times. I laid out the basic facts clearly and concisely. The suspicious will, the threatened disinheritance, Grandpa's letter and video evidence, the journal documenting financial crimes. I spoke for exactly 12 minutes, leaving 3 for questions. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her expression giving nothing away. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, tapping hairpin against her desk. Then she leaned forward. What you're describing is will forgery, coercion, potentially conspiracy to commit fraud. The threatened violence could be attempted murder if we can prove it wasn't just talk. Your grandfather's death under suspicious circumstances could be actual murder. But here's my problem. Your evidence, while compelling, is circumstantial. A letter and videos that weren't witnessed or notarized by a third party could be dismissed as forgeries themselves. You need the original will. And you need more proof. I know where the original will is, I said, and Grandpa said he documented everything. If I can get into the manor, into that safe, I can get it all. Eleanor's expression hardened. Breaking and entering would make all of that evidence inadmissible. Fruit of the poisonous tree. Anything obtained illegally can't be used in court. And it would destroy your credibility. Any competent defense attorney would have the case thrown out before we even got to trial. What if someone with proper authority accompanied her? Caleb suggested. If there's reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, couldn't you get a warrant? Eleanor considered this. Possibly. But I'd need more than what you've shown me to convince a judge to issue a warrant against the Thorne family. These are serious allegations against one of New York's most prominent families. Judges are going to be very reluctant to authorize what could look like a fishing expedition. I need something more concrete. Something that can't be explained away. Over the next 2 months, Caleb and I worked to build that concrete case. We pored over public financial records, finding irregularities in Thorne Holdings' quarterly reports. We tracked down former employees who'd been fired or pushed out, carefully approaching them to see if anyone would talk. Most were too afraid, but a few gave us valuable information about suspicious practices, about being told to falsify documents, about witnessing questionable meetings. We hired a private investigator, a retired NYPD detective named Frank Martinez, who Caleb trusted. Frank started digging into David Sterling, the lawyer who'd read the will. Within 2 weeks, Frank came back with interesting findings. David Sterling had been struggling financially, drowning in student loans and credit card debt. Then, 2 months before Grandpa's death, a mysterious wire transfer of $200,000 appeared in his account from an offshore shell corporation, the same shell corporation that appeared multiple times in Grandpa's journal as a vehicle for my father's illegal activities, but our investigation didn't go unnoticed. Someone was watching us. It started small. Wrong number phone calls at odd hours. The feeling of being followed when I went out. Then it escalated. Caleb's car was broken into, though nothing was taken. Just a message. We know what you're doing. Then came the accident. Caleb was driving home from the grocery store when another car ran a red light and slammed into his driver's side at full speed. The other car, a black SUV with tinted windows, didn't stop. It sped away, and no witnesses got the license plate. Caleb ended up in the hospital with a broken arm, 3 cracked ribs, and a concussion. I sat by his hospital bed, my hands shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. They tried to kill you. They know what we're doing. And they tried to kill you. Caleb, despite being heavily medicated, managed a weak smile. They failed. I'm still alive. And I'm not backing down. But Anya, you need to be even more careful now. If they're willing to come after me, they'll definitely come after you. I moved again. This time to a safe house that Frank Martinez helped me arrange. A small apartment in Brooklyn under a fake name, paid for in cash. I told Robert Sterling at work that I had a family emergency and needed to take an extended leave. He was understanding, thank God, and told me my position would be waiting when I was ready to come back. Eleanor Reed, when she heard about Caleb's accident, became more interested. An attempted hit and run on someone investigating your case. That's not coincidence. But we still need more for a warrant. Keep digging. But please, for God's sake, be careful. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Morrison, the physician who'd treated my grandfather, reached out through an anonymous email to a secure account Caleb had set up. She wanted to meet, but only in secret, and only if we could guarantee her safety. We met at a diner 3 hours outside the city, a place where no one would recognize any of us. Dr. Morrison looked exhausted, like she hadn't been sleeping well. Her hands shook slightly as she stirred her coffee. I've been struggling with this for 8 months, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I took an oath to do no harm. And I feel like my silence has been doing exactly that. Your grandfather was my patient for almost a year. I watched him decline, but there was something that never sat right with me about his final weeks. What do you mean? I asked, leaning forward. Harrison was sick. Yes, chronic heart disease, high blood pressure, the complications of age. But he was managing it. We had a treatment plan, medications that were working. His vitals were stabilizing. His cognitive function remained sharp. He was getting better. Anya. And then, about 3 weeks before he died, everything changed. Changed how? He took a dramatic turn for the worse. Suddenly, he was confused, lethargic, showing symptoms that didn't match his diagnosis. His blood work started showing anomalies I couldn't explain. I wanted to run more tests, but the family, specifically your father, insisted on keeping him at home. They brought in new doctors, specialists, they said, but they wouldn't let me coordinate with them. They limited my access to Harrison. When I did see him, he seemed terrified, but he wouldn't or couldn't tell me what was wrong. My blood ran cold. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Doctor. Morrison's eyes filled with tears. I'm saying that I believe Harrison was being poisoned. I can't prove it, but the symptoms, the timeline, the family's behavior, it all points to it. And then he died. Suddenly. Of what was officially ruled heart failure. I requested an autopsy. I insisted on it, but the family refused, which was their right. They had him cremated within 24 hours of his death. Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you go to the police? Your father is a powerful man. He could destroy my career with a phone call. He could sue me for defamation. Have my medical license revoked? But I've been having nightmares about this. I wake up every night thinking about Harrison begging me with his eyes to help him, and me being too afraid to push harder. I can't live with that anymore. If there's an official investigation, if there's protection for me as a witness, I'll testify to everything I saw and suspected. Eleanor Reed's reaction when we brought her Dr. Morrison's testimony was immediate. A licensed physician with specific medical concerns about the death, combined with the other evidence you've gathered, that's exactly what I needed. I can get a warrant now. But the process wasn't quick. Eleanor had to present everything to a federal judge. Make the case that there was probable cause to believe crimes had been committed. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Catherine Walsh. I was known for being protective of civil liberties and skeptical of government overreach. She reviewed the evidence for 2 days before finally agreeing to issue a limited search warrant for the Thorne estate, specifically for Grandpa's study and personal quarters. The execution of the warrant was scheduled for a Tuesday morning, 3 months after I'd received Grandpa's package. Eleanor warned me I couldn't be there officially, but she arranged for me to be in an unmarked car, a block away with Frank Martinez, watching through binoculars as federal agents and police officers descended on the family estate was surreal. The house I'd grown up in, that symbol of wealth and power, was swarming with law enforcement. My father came storming out, his face purple with rage, screaming about harassment and false allegations. My mother followed, for once not perfectly composed, her hair disheveled, her voice shrill as she demanded to speak to her lawyer. Marcus appeared in the doorway looking confused and scared, probably high on whatever he'd been using lately. The agents were inside for nearly 7 hours. When they finally came out, they were carrying boxes and boxes of evidence. Eleanor called me that evening. Anya, we found more than I ever hoped for. The safe was exactly where your grandfather said it would be. The original will was inside, dated 5 years ago. Leaving everything to you. But there was more. So much more. Grandpa had been even more thorough than any of us realized. He'd kept duplicate journals, financial records going back 15 years. He recorded conversations on old-fashioned tape cassettes. He'd documented every illegal deal, every bribe, every instance of fraud. There were contracts showing that my father had been systematically embezzling from Thorne Holdings for years, funneling money into personal accounts and shell corporations. But the most damning evidence was something none of us had anticipated. Grandpa had installed a hidden camera and audio system in his personal quarters months before his death. The footage was extensive and devastating. Hours and hours of my father and mother pressuring him, threatening him, manipulating him. There was video of the day he changed the will, with my father standing over him, his voice cold and menacing. "Change it now, old man, or Anya will have an unfortunate accident. You know how dangerous the city is for young women. Mudgings, hit and runs. So many ways to die." The video showed Grandpa's hands shaking as he signed the new will, tears running down his face. "You're a monster," he whispered. "What did I do to deserve a son like you?" "You got weak," my father responded. "You let sentiment cloud your judgment. This is business. Father, survival of the fittest. Adapt or die." But there was more. The agents found a secret room in the basement behind a false wall. Inside was a recording setup, and more importantly, medical evidence. Grandpa had been secretly testing his own medications. He'd kept samples, sent some to labs under false names. The results showed that his heart medication had been tampered with, replaced with a different drug, one that would mimic and worsen heart disease symptoms while actually poisoning him slowly. Eleanor's voice was grim when she explained this to me. "Anya, this isn't just fraud and coercion anymore. This is murder. Premeditated, calculated murder. We have evidence that your grandfather was being systematically poisoned over several weeks, and we have recordings of your father and mother discussing it. Discussing the poisoning. They actually talked about it. In coded language. But yes, your grandfather was smarter than they realized. He hid microphones in his bedroom, his bathroom, even the little sitting room where your mother would bring him tea. We have hours of recordings. Combined with the medical evidence, with Dr. Morrison's testimony, with the financial fraud, we have enough to bring murder charges." The arrests happened on a Thursday morning, exactly 4 months after I'd opened that package. I wasn't there for those either. But Eleanor made sure I was informed immediately. Julian Thorne was arrested at his office at Thorne Holdings in front of his entire staff. Serafina was arrested at a charity luncheon, led away in handcuffs, while the city's elite watched in shock. Marcus was arrested at his apartment, where police found cocaine and evidence that he'd been helping his parents hide assets. The media explosion was immediate and overwhelming. The fall of the Thorne dynasty dominated every news channel, every newspaper, every website. Reporters camped outside the houses, the offices, anywhere connected to the family. The story had everything: wealth, power, betrayal, murder. It was a feeding frenzy. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters somehow got my number and called constantly. I changed it 3 times. Old acquaintances from my society days reached out, suddenly wanting to reconnect. I ignored them all. The only people I talked to were Caleb, Eleanor, Dr. Morrison, and Frank Martinez. Marcus was the first to crack. Faced with murder charges and overwhelming evidence, his expensive lawyers advised him to take a deal. He agreed to testify against our parents in exchange for reduced charges on the fraud and as an accessory after the fact. The prosecution didn't necessarily need his testimony given the video and audio evidence, but it would help establish the family dynamics, the culture of corruption that had pervaded the Thorne household. The call came late one night, about 2 weeks after the arrests. Marcus had somehow gotten my new number. His voice was slurred, probably drunk or high. Maybe both. "Anya, is this Anya? Please don't hang up. What do you want?" "Marcus, I just wanted to say I'm sorry." "Okay, I'm sorry for everything. You didn't deserve any of this. I was an asshole. I was a terrible brother. I knew what they were doing, and I went along with it because it benefited me." "You're drunk." "Yeah, I'm drunk. I'm drunk because I can't sleep anymore. Every time I close my eyes, I see Grandpa's face when Dad threatened him. I was there. Anya. I was in the room when Dad first told Grandpa to change the will. I heard Dad describe exactly how he'd hurt you if Grandpa didn't comply. And I just stood there. I didn't say anything. I didn't try to stop it. My hand gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Why are you telling me this now? Because I'm scared. I'm terrified. Dad and Mom. They made me do things. Terrible things. I helped them hide money. I helped them forge documents. I was there when they met with that lawyer Sterling. Coached him on what to say. I took the original will from Grandpa's safe and gave it to Dad. My fingerprints are all over this, and now they're going to send me to prison. And I deserve it. But I'm so scared. Marcus, are you willing to testify? Are you willing to tell the truth in court? There was a long silence. I could hear him crying. Then I heard him vomit. And the line went dead. He didn't answer my calls after that. But his lawyers made contact with the prosecutor's office the next day. Marcus was taking the deal. He would testify to everything. The trial preparation took 8 months. During that time, I learned things about my family that made me physically sick. The investigation had uncovered so much more than we'd initially known. The financial fraud had been going on for over a decade. Millions of dollars stolen from investors, from business partners, from charitable foundations that my parents had established not out of altruism, but as vehicles for money laundering. They'd bribed city officials to get zoning variances, paid off building inspectors to ignore safety violations, even threatened and intimidated people who tried to expose their corruption. One former business partner had filed a lawsuit 5 years ago, claiming fraud. He dropped it suddenly after receiving threats against his family. We tracked him down, and with promises of protection, he agreed to testify. The evidence against my parents was so overwhelming that their lawyers tried multiple times to negotiate a plea deal, but Eleanor refused. They murdered an old man for money, she said. They threatened to kill their own daughter. They've spent years stealing and corrupting. No deals. We're going to trial. And we're going to get justice. The trial itself started on a cold Monday in February, almost a year after I'd received Grandpa's package. The courthouse was surrounded by media, by protesters holding signs about corporate corruption, by curiosity seekers who just wanted to be part of a spectacle. Security was intense. There had been threats against Eleanor, against me, against the witnesses. The judge ordered extra marshals and metal detectors. Judge Catherine Walsh, the same judge who'd issued the warrant, was presiding. She was known for running a tight courtroom, for not tolerating grandstanding or delays. Her first order was to ban cameras from the courtroom, citing the sensitive nature of the evidence and the need for witness protection. My parents sat at the defense table, flanked by a team of 5 lawyers. The best that money could buy. They'd spent millions on their defense, liquidating assets, calling in favors. My father looked thinner than I remembered, his hair grayer, his face harder. My mother was still trying to maintain her perfect appearance, designer clothes and careful makeup. But there was something broken in her eyes. They both glared at me when I entered the courtroom, pure hatred radiating from them. I sat through every day of that trial, in the gallery behind the prosecution, flanked by Caleb and Dr. Morrison, who'd become unlikely friends through this ordeal. Eleanor sat at the prosecutor's table, organized and focused, radiating competence and determination. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Eleanor started with the financial crimes, establishing a pattern of fraud and corruption. She brought in forensic accountants who'd traced the money, showing exactly how millions of dollars had been stolen and hidden. Former Thorn Holdings employees testified about being ordered to falsify documents, about witnessing bribes being paid, about being threatened into silence. Then she moved to the will fraud. David Sterling, the young lawyer who'd read the fake will. I had also taken a plea deal rather than face decades in prison. He testified about being approached by my father, about being paid $200,000 to participate in the fraud, but about being coached on exactly what to say and how to handle any questions. He was a nervous wreck on the stand, sweating through his suit, barely able to look at my parents. The defense tried to destroy his credibility, pointing out that he was a confessed criminal, testifying to save himself. But Eleanor was ready. She presented the bank records showing the payment, the emails coordinating the meeting, the phone records. She showed that David Sterling had never met my grandfather until the day of the will reading, that all his knowledge of Harrison Thorne's wishes came from my father. Then came the medical evidence. Dr. Morrison testified about Grandpa's mysterious decline, about the symptoms that didn't match his diagnosis, about being shut out of his care in his final weeks. A toxicologist testified about the tampered medication, explaining how someone had systematically replaced his heart medication with a drug that would worsen his condition while making it look like natural disease progression. This wasn't a mercy killing, the toxicologist explained. This wasn't someone in pain being released. This was slow murder. The substituted drug would have caused increasing confusion, weakness, cardiac symptoms, all while looking like natural disease progression. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They were patient, calculated. They wanted Harrison Thorne to suffer before he died. The defense objected constantly, trying to block the testimony, arguing that there was no direct proof my parents had administered the drugs. But Eleanor had that covered too. The hidden camera footage showed my mother bringing Grandpa his medications, showed her carefully administering pills that she got from a hidden location, not from the pharmacy bottles. And then came the recordings. The courtroom fell absolutely silent as Grandpa's hidden camera footage played on screens around the room. Watching it was like witnessing a horror movie. Except it was real. My father's voice, cold and threatening. My mother's laughter as she dismissed Grandpa's pleas. The moment when Grandpa signed the fake will, tears streaming down his face. Several jurors were crying. The judge had to call a recess. My parents' lawyers looked like they wanted to crawl under the table. There was no defending against this. The evidence was too clear, too damning, too overwhelming. But Eleanor wasn't done. She called Marcus to the stand. My brother looked like he'd aged a decade in the past year. He was thinner, pâler, his expensive clothes hanging loose on his frame. He couldn't look at our parents as he was sworn in. Marcus's testimony was damning. He described the family dynamics, the culture of corruption, the way our parents had taught him that power and money justified anything. He described being present when our father first threatened Grandpa, hearing the explicit threats against me, watching as plans were made to forge the will. "Did you object?" Eleanor asked. "Did you try to stop your parents from threatening your grandfather and your sister?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "No. I thought it was just talk. And part of me, God help me, part of me wanted Anya to stay out of the inheritance. I wanted it all for myself. I was selfish and greedy, and I let them do terrible things because it benefited me." The defense attorneys tried to discredit him during cross-examination, pointing out all the ways he was complicit, suggesting he was lying to save himself. But Marcus stuck to his story, and more importantly, his testimony aligned perfectly with all the physical evidence, all the recordings, all the documents. Then it was my turn. I'd been dreading this moment for months. Walking to the witness stand, I felt every eye in that courtroom on me. My parents' gazes felt like physical weight, pressing down on me, trying to make me small and afraid like I used to be. But I wasn't that person anymore. Eleanor had prepared me well. I spoke clearly and calmly about my relationship with Grandpa, about his character, about our conversations. I described the day of the will reading, my suspicions, the package I received. I talked about Grandpa's letter, about his fears, about his final message to me. When the defense cross-examined me, they tried to paint me as greedy, as vengeful, as someone fabricating evidence to steal an inheritance. My father's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Jonathan Pierce, was aggressive and condescending. "Miss Thorne, isn't it true that you've always been jealous of your brother, that you resented not being the favored child?" I wasn't jealous of Marcus. I responded evenly. I was hurt by my parents' favoritism, but that didn't make me want to destroy my family. I just wanted to be loved. And yet, here you are, testifying against your own parents, seeking to send them to prison. That doesn't seem like love. Miss Thorne, love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Love doesn't mean staying silent in the face of murder. My grandfather loved me, truly loved me, and my parents killed him. Testifying against them isn't about revenge. It's about justice for a good man who deserved better than the death they gave him. Pierce tried several other angles, but Eleanor objected to most of his more aggressive questions, and the judge sustained most of her objections. I left the stand feeling shaky but proud. I'd faced them. I'd told the truth. And I hadn't backed down. The trial lasted 6 weeks. The defense tried to argue reasonable doubt, tried to suggest alternative explanations, tried to paint my parents as victims of a conspiracy by disgruntled family members and employees. But the evidence was too strong, too clear, too overwhelming. The closing arguments took an entire day. The defense went first, with Jonathan Pierce delivering an impassioned speech about presumption of innocence about the prosecution's burden of proof, about not letting media circus influence justice. It was well delivered, but it felt hollow against the mountain of evidence. Eleanor's closing argument was powerful. She walked the jury through every piece of evidence, connecting the dots, showing the pattern of corruption and greed that culminated in murder. She talked about Harrison Thorne, about the life he'd built, about his final days spent in fear and pain at the hands of his own son. She talked about justice, about accountability, about sending a message that no one, no matter how wealthy or powerful, is above the law. Harrison Thorne built an empire, Eleanor concluded, her voice ringing through the courtroom. He built it with hard work, with integrity, with a sense of responsibility to his employees and his community. And his son destroyed it, corrupted it, turned it into a vehicle for greed and murder. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have the power to restore justice. You have the power to say that this ends here. That wealth does not protect you from consequences. That power does not place you above the law. I ask you to find Julian Thorne and Seraphina Thorne guilty on all counts. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days of waiting, of pacing, of trying not to lose my mind with anxiety. Caleb stayed with me in a hotel near the courthouse. Doctor Morrison came by to check on me. Frank Martinez brought food that I couldn't eat. Eleanor was confident but cautious. The evidence is overwhelming, but juries can be unpredictable, especially with defendants this wealthy and prominent. On the 3rd day, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. We rushed to the courthouse, pushing through the media crowd, taking our seats as the jury filed in. None of them looked at the defense table. That was a good sign, Eleanor whispered to me. Judge Walsh called for order. The foreman, a middle-aged black woman who worked as a school teacher, stood with the verdict forms in her hands. On the count of murder in the 1st degree, how do you find the defendants? We find both defendants guilty. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel, calling for order. My father collapsed in his chair, his face going from red to white to gray. My mother let out a strangled sound, her careful composure finally shattering completely. I couldn't hear the rest of the verdict over the noise in my own head. The rushing of blood, the pounding of my heart. Guilty on all counts. Murder, fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, witness intimidation. The list went on and on. Every single charge. Guilty. And then my father clutched his chest. For a moment, I thought he was faking, trying for sympathy. But his face was contorting with real pain, his breath coming in gasps. He fell from his chair, hitting the floor hard. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Paramedics rushed in. CPR was started. I watched it all from a distance, feeling detached, almost numb. My father, the man who'd threatened me, who'd murdered his own father, there was having a massive heart attack right there on the courtroom floor. He survived, but barely. The stroke that followed left him severely incapacitated. The doctors said he'd never walk again, probably never speak again. He'd spend the rest of his life in a skilled nursing facility, a prison of his own body, even before he started serving his prison sentence. My mother was sentenced 3 weeks later. 25 years to life in federal prison. At her age, it was essentially a life sentence. Seraphina Thorne, who'd spent her entire life cultivating an image of grace and sophistication, who'd looked down on everyone she considered beneath her, would spend her final years in an orange jumpsuit, sharing a cell, eating prison food, and being treated like the criminal she was. Marcus got 8 years with his plea deal, plus 5 years probation. He'd be eligible for parole in 6. When he was led away after sentencing, he looked at me one last time. I saw regret in his eyes, maybe even genuine remorse. But it was too late. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. The legal process of unwinding the Thorne estate and recovering the stolen inheritance took another 6 months. The lawyers fought every step, but the courts were clear. The will was fraudulent. The real will was valid. And everything was to go to me as Harrison Thorne had intended. When the final papers were signed, when the last appeals were denied, I found myself the owner of Thorne Holdings and all its associated assets. The fortune was substantial. More substantial than I'd ever imagined. but it was also tainted, built partly on corruption and theft. I made decision quickly. Thorn Holdings was dismantled. The legitimate assets were sold. With the proceeds going first to repay everyone my parents had defrauded, then to the employees who'd lost jobs in the scandal. The properties were liquidated. The corrupt parts of the empire were shut down completely. And then, following my grandfather's true wishes as expressed in his original will and his letters to me, I established the Harrison Thorne Foundation for Justice and Ethics. I funded it with the bulk of the inheritance, keeping only enough for myself to live comfortably but not extravagantly. The foundation provides free legal representation to people fighting against powerful corporations and wealthy individuals who abuse their power. It funds investigations into corruption. It supports whistleblowers and protects witnesses. It offers scholarships to law students who are committed to public interest work. I went back to school, got my law degree, passed the bar. Now I work as a lawyer for the foundation. Every case I take, every person I help, I think about my grandfather and what he taught me about using wealth and power responsibly. Uncle Caleb came out of retirement to work with me. At 71 years old, he says he's having the time of his life, finally fighting the battles he always wanted to fight. Dr. Morrison serves on the foundation's board, ensuring medical ethics cases get the attention they deserve. Frank Martinez became our chief investigator, using his law enforcement experience to uncover corruption and build cases. The Thorne estate was sold. I couldn't bear to keep it, not with all the memories of manipulation and betrayal that seeped from every wall. The proceeds went to the foundation, the Manhattan penthouse, the Aspen house, the French Riviera villa. All of it sold. All of it turned into something that would actually help people. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it, if I wish I'd just taken the money from the fake will and walked away, if destroying my family was worth it. The answer is always the same. They weren't my family. Not really. Family doesn't threaten you. Family doesn't steal from you. Family doesn't murder for money. What I destroyed wasn't a family. It was a criminal enterprise that wore the mask of respectability. I sleep well at night, knowing that justice was served, knowing that my grandfather's true legacy lives on through the foundation, knowing that I fought back when it would have been easier to give up. My father died 2 years after his trial, his body finally giving out completely. I didn't attend his funeral. My mother is still in prison, eligible for parole in 15 years, when she'll be 78. I've received letters from her, begging for forgiveness, asking me to petition for early release. I've never responded. Some things can't be forgiven. Marcus was released last year after serving his full sentence. He tried to contact me once, to apologize again, to ask if we could rebuild some kind of relationship. I declined. Too much had been broken. Too much trust destroyed. I hope he's building a better life for himself. But I can't be part of it. 3 years later, I'm standing in a courtroom again. But this time I'm the one asking the questions. I'm representing a young woman whose inheritance was stolen by her uncle. As I present the evidence, as I watch the truth unfold, I think about how far I've come from that broken girl who left her family's estate with nothing but $520,000 and a shattered heart. Legacy isn't what you inherit. It's what you build with your own hands. What you create from the ashes of injustice. What you pass on to the next generation of fighters. That's the lesson my grandfather really left me. And it's worth more than any fortune could ever be. Have you ever had to stand up to powerful people who thought they were untouchable? Have you ever had to choose between staying silent and fighting for what's right? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, if you believe in fighting for justice, no matter the cost, please hit that like button and subscribe. These stories matter. Your support helps spread the message that no one is above accountability, no matter how rich or powerful they are. What's your take on family betrayal and standing up for yourself? Let me know in the comments.